Welcome out to a special episode of It's All Been Trek Before. This time, Jimmy Jerome talking with Star Trek author Tom Salinsky about his book, Star Trek Discovering the TV series, the original series, the animated series, and the next generation. You're like, oh, did he stop there? No, he didn't. But this is just the first of several books. But this, speaking of gateway drugs, get in on this. Give a listen. It's a very special episode all over the Trek sphere. Trek sphere. We're learning you here on It's All Been Trek Before.
Welcome out to another episode of It's All Been Trekked Before. One of your regular hosts is here, Jimmy Jerome, and I am here with a very special guest, Tom Salinsky, author of Star Trek Discovering the TV series, the original series, the animated series, and the next generation. Tom, why don't you give your background? When did you get into Star Trek? What is your Star Trek history?
This book and the project that the book grew out of was an attempt to fill in a bit of Star Trek history. So if listeners haven't already figured it out, I am from the UK. And I've been a science fiction fan all my life, and particularly Doctor Who, but also Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Red Dwarf, Blake Seven, and yes, Star Trek. But to me, Star Trek mainly meant the movies, and then when I could watch it, Star Trek The Next Generation.
And the original six movies?
The original six movies in particular,
okay.
Yes. Yeah. And then I was sort of like, then watching everything else as it came out. But when I was like 10 years old, I had the novelization of Wrath of Khan on my bookshelf, because you seem a little bit younger than me, James, but when I was 10 years old, you couldn't stream Wrath of Khan if you felt like watching it. You couldn't even get it on a VHS. If you wanted to re-experience it, you had to read the novel by Vonda McIntyre. And that's what I did over and over again.
Oh, yeah.
So a couple of years ago, at the end of 2021, it occurred to me to wonder how much Star Trek I've actually watched. Because suddenly there's new Star Trek all over the TV, which I am watching and by and large enjoying. But I thought, so I can remember Voyager starting. I remember watching like bits and pieces of Deep Space Nine, but kind of getting a bit lost. I remember seeing very little of Enterprise and not really enjoying much of that. And so it occurred to me to wonder how long would it take to watch the lot?
Mm-hmm.
And what I discovered was, if I watched an episode a day, and I started on the 1st of January 2022 with the Man Trap, then I could be watching the last episode of Enterprise on Christmas Day 2023. And that seemed like too good an opportunity to pass up.
That's fantastic.
So that's what I did. And this book is the first of what is planned as 2 volumes. I think it's actually going to now be 3 volumes, which will cover that entire journey. So the first volume, as you said, is the original series, the animated series, and the next generation. And it's my thoughts. It's how they struck me. And I hope some of the insights I have will be interesting, and some of the things I point out will be funny, and that people will find things that they passionately agree with and feel seen, and people will find things where I couldn't be more wrong and they'll get happily cross.
That's fantastic. As you mentioned, the first volume looks like on Amazon it's pre-orderable. It will be available on April 30th. This episode will probably come out before then, so jump on over to Amazon.
Should be available on the 12th. It was originally due for publication on the 30th of March. There was a delay at the printers, and I think Amazon's got gun shy and has put April the 30th up, because that will definitely be right. But it should be available Friday or the following Monday, so mid-April.
Okay. So as you're hearing this, get on over, check out this book. You said there's a second volume coming, the DS9 Voyager Enterprise. That's a second and or third volume?
Yeah, probably third. It was planned as 2 books, but turns out that especially Deep Space Nine and Voyager put out a lot of episodes. And my publisher is nervous about fat books. So maybe there'll be an enormous omnibus edition at some point. It does rack up to about 250,000 words, which does seem like an awful lot, but there it is. Yeah. So I think what we're going to do is we'll split. I'm not quite sure where the split's going to come, because I don't want the second volume just to be Deep Space Nine. We're still figuring that out. But the plan is, everything from Kirk to Archer in probably 3 books.
Are the original movies included in this next gen?
Original movies, and then so
Okay.
the original movies are in the first book, and then the next gen movies will be in one of, or maybe will split across books 2 and 3.
Right. So
I did not want to end this book on Nemesis.
No, that doesn't seem right.
No.
So our podcast, we're doing a rewatch from the beginning. We've made it all the way through original series and animated. We've recorded all the way through next gen, but we haven't released. So as this releases, we're midway through the final season of next gen and midway through the second season of DS9 because we're doing an air date. So we're going back and forth.
That's what I did.
But we've seen the original 6 movies. So this book will cover almost everything in this book will have already been released on the podcast. We're closing in on the end of your volume 1 as it stands. So that's pretty cool.
It's nice timing. I'm ashamed to say I didn't know your podcast existed until very recently. But it's fascinating to find someone else going on a similar journey. And like I said, I hold no great expectations that the opinions I express will be shared by everybody or indeed anybody. But I think it is interesting to compare and contrast.
Well, we don't really worry about if people agree with us or not. As we're famous on saying in the podcast, one of our co-hosts is named Keith. And I just tell them any complaints can be sent to Keith at iabdpresents.com. So I don't have to take responsibility for what I say. We just shove it off on Keith. He's not here, which makes it even better. Any complaints about tonight's episode, Keith at iabdpresents.com, please.
Excellent.
I grew up mainly with Next Gen DS9 Voyager era. And then watched the original kind of after the fact. Like you, I watched the original 6 movies a lot. That was Star Trek to me. In fact, Star Trek the Motion Picture was my first Star Trek experience, so there's a special place in my heart for that one, despite the hate it gets from various people. But DS9's always been my favorite. I loved the serialization, the politics, the religion, and everything. For you, having watched these 5 television series, which one is your favorite?
It's so hard to pick favorites. There's so many episodes and they're so varied because, I would much rather watch the very, very best that Enterprise has to offer than the very, very worst that Next Gen has to offer, for example. Sure. And I think over every series, I gave at least one episode 1 star and at least one episode the full 5 stars. Mm. Some series took longer than others to achieve that 5-star milestone. The season I gave the highest average rating to, which was a surprise to me, was TNG season 6. I thought it would be 4 or 5, and it turned out to be 6. There's just so many really strong episodes there. But the most consistent run of episodes, I think, is it's Deep Space Nine. I think is it end of 3 into 4, or is it 4 into 5?
Well, 4 starts with Way of the Warrior.
Yeah, which is amazing.
Oh, yeah. For me, that's when the show really picked up. I enjoyed the first 3 seasons, but season 4 through 7 were, stellar, in my opinion.
Yeah. So I think Deep Space Nine was the one where I was most consistently into it. And then Voyager was a little bit of... I have to accept that this is not the same show. And it's especially weird bouncing back and forth between Deep Space Nine and Voyager, as you will find out. Bouncing between TNG and Deep Space Nine is a bit easier, partly because TNG is getting a bit darker, and partly because Deep Space Nine hasn't figured out its groove yet. But going between Deep Space Nine and Voyager is incredibly bizarre, and I do think it's weird. This is just one of those things that nobody sat down and planned out. But I do think it's weird that the show in which the characters all hang around a shopping mall in space is the one about generational trauma and the horrors of war. And the series about the group of people flung off to a distant part of the galaxy, hoping they might someday get home, is the one which has to carry the torch for Star Trek's signature optimism about the future. That's a
good point. I've never thought of it in that context.
You wouldn't sit down and plan it like that. But I did eventually, especially after 7 or 9 turns up, find myself falling in love with Voyager's willingness just to be bonkers. Just to be like, what's the most ridiculous thing we could put in the first 5 minutes and not completely break the show? Let's do that.
So I've seen about half of Voyager, and pretty equally split among the seasons. So I'm looking forward to actually sitting down and watching the whole thing. Enterprise, I've only seen the first 10 episodes and then the last season. And the last season was fantastic. So I'm
Last
really
season's
looking
pretty
forward
good.
to filling in those holes.
Season
The
3 is the
animated
interesting one because
series-
season 3 has definitely got much more kind of propulsion behind it, but they throw all their chips behind one story idea, and it's pretty clear that they did not have that mapped out when they started.
Yeah, I know Voyager. So Rodney Moore and Braden Braga, of course, wrote the first two Next Gen films and the Next Gen series finale. But then they split. Ronald D. Moore went to DS9 and Braden Braga went to Voyager, and that was a whole thing of should we be serialized or not? And the networks didn't like the DS9 got so serialized because nobody was paying attention to them, so they kind of did whatever they wanted.
Yeah, they're on syndication; they can do what they like.
Right, and I do feel like New Trek. And I don't know if you've seen much of New Trek. I'll ask you in a second, but I do feel like New Trek owes a lot more to DS9 than it does to Voyager or even possibly Next Gen, based on what was set up for the future.
Oh, it's just how we make TV these days. You can't get away without having a quite high degree of serialization, especially when you're only making 8 to 12 episodes a year. You kind of want to have something which will repay people coming back. It's different if you're doing 26 episodes, and then it's harder to sustain an arc over that length of time. But also that gives you the freedom to experiment and play around and center different characters and play in different genres. When you've got 10 episodes, you sort of want a bit more continuity and a bit more consistency. I also find it amazing with Deep Space Nine that it's not only the grimmest of all of the Star Trek series, it's also, when it wants to be, the goofiest.
Yes.
I don't know how many other versions of the show could get away with bada bing, bada boom. Maybe Strange New Worlds could.
I mean, yeah, Strange New Worlds is my favorite of the New Trek. Have you watched much of the New Trek series?
Yeah, I think I basically watched everything. So I'm,
okay. So
as of this moment, a Star Trek completist. I'm not including books and comics and cereal packets and video games and so on.
Yeah. For the New Trek, is there going to be a fourth volume coming where you're going to sit and
not immediately? And that's for two separate reasons. Reason number one is that would require me to watch the J.J. Abrams films.
I'm sorry. That's painful, but it is only 3 films, then we're done. And the third one's not bad.
The third one's not bad. I will give you that. Yeah. But the first one is far worse than I thought it was going to be. And the second one is just horrible.
Worst Trek film ever made. Yeah, absolutely.
So that's reason number one. Reason number two is I was interested in putting these shows in their historical context. And it's hard to do that with something which is still on air. What we think about Strange New Worlds Season 2 may be completely altered when we've seen Strange New Worlds Season 6. So if there is a fourth volume, it will be years from now.
Makes sense. Total. I mean, I as much as I absolutely love getting all this new Trek right now, I have felt since Discovery Season 1 that at some point they're just going to come and cancel it all. Like, I felt that, I don't know if it's because of, survivor trauma from what we went through at the end of Enterprise and Nemesis and stuff, but I just keep waiting for that shoe to drop that they abandon Star Trek as a franchise again for a while. Hopefully
this is what happens. Things have their moment in the sun, and then the sun sets. But with any luck, the sun rises again. Again, Doctor Who fan.
Doctor Who
off the air from 1989 to 2005 with just a single TV movie in between. So yeah, we know. But here we are.
I've watched all the new Doctor Who from the restart with Eccleston, but I am going back right now and doing a rewatch of the old stuff. I'm halfway through the Hartnell, so I'm very beginning, but I'm watching it serial by serial and doing the novelizations and the audio recordings where there's no episode to watch, and it's a ride. I really enjoy it. It's very different than Star Trek, but I enjoy both franchises very much.
And more or less contemporaries. Doctor Who started in 1963, Star Trek in 66.
Right.
And just as Star Trek's creators were bemoaning the fact that they didn't have enough money and were doing everything on a shoestring, the makers of Doctor Who over here in the UK were looking at this glossy American import with barely concealed envy at the movie production values they apparently had.
I was going to say, I used to do TV reviewing for money a lot, and BBC was constantly sending me the Doctor Who DVDs, so I've seen a lot of random Doctor Who's from the 70s and 80s, and the stuff near the end of the 80s run still looks far worse than Next Generation. Like,
Yes.
far worse.
Yeah, because
Right?
it's
Like,
all
it's still like 60s Star Trek level.
it's all being
Budget.
shot on video, and I think it says literally true. Or maybe pounds to dollars, it's not true, but I think a season of 14 episodes of Doctor Who in 1989 cost about £1.5 million. And a single episode of Star Trek The Next Generation, I think, cost about $1 million.
Yeah, that makes
sense.
Yeah.
But what I think is particularly amazing about Next Gen, because I rewatched all of Next Gen about 10 years ago when the Blu-rays came out, it was all shot on 35mm film.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was watching it here, what I was watching was, because it was then converted to videotape for editing, I was watching PAL conversions of NTSC videotapes, and it always looked smeary and the colors were off. But now we're able to watch it rescanned from the 35mm film. It looks unbelievable. It looks like it was shot yesterday.
Yeah.
And tiny things like the fact that they use touchscreens for all the controls make a huge difference. Because think about when Star Trek, the original series, was on the air, 66 to 69. Next Gen started in 87. That's about a 20-year gap.
Mm-hmm.
But when we were sitting down to watch Next Gen in 87, 88, the original series looked dated as hell.
Yes.
But now we're getting close to 40 years since Next Gen came on the air, and it still looks amazing.
Yeah.
It's this incredible sweet spot. And then it's Deep Space Nine and Voyager that actually look worse because all the computer graphics that were in their infancy were only ever done at TV resolution. And there's a little bit you can do with AI upscaling, but they're never going to look as good as the earlier series, which was all shot on film with model spaceships and so on.
Yeah. And as of this recording, there's no plans to upgrade DS9 and Voyager to Blu-ray and that HD quality just because they don't think it's cost effective, which I don't know, it would be back and forth.
It would be even more
Blu-rays.
expensive than Next Gen, and not enough people bought Next Gen. So fans, you have only yourselves to blame.
I bought them. You can't blame me. I bought the DVDs and the Blu-rays.
You should have bought 5 copies.
I can't afford that. I spend enough money on this other Star Trek stuff.
And listen, I bought mine secondhand, so I'm not one to judge.
I have the original series on the 40 DVD volumes of 2 episodes per volume. I mean, I bought the Blu-ray upgrades as well, but I collected the original Star Trek DVDs when they were coming out in the States, where it was 2 episodes per volume. It was... So one thing that struck us as we were rewatching the original series, and I'd only seen probably a third of the original series when we started this podcast, but that show's
at its best.
It's really good.
Season 1 is amazing, especially the second half of Season 1. It's fantastic.
And Season 2, I think, was even better than Season 1.
I think there's good stuff all the way through, but that there's an incredible run of episodes towards the end of Season 1 where you've got Devil in the Dark and City on the Edge of Forever and all these amazing shows. And then Season 2 starts strong with Amok Time. It's
Mirror,
it's
Journey
strong,
to Babel.
Yeah, strong stuff. And like you, I hadn't seen very many of those early episodes. Scattered memories of watching 1 or 2 when they were on BBC Two when I was a kid, but I wasn't a Star Trek guy, so I wasn't really watching them. I read some of the James Blish books. I don't know if you've got any of those on your shelf behind.
I've got them all.
There you go.
I've got them all.
Yeah. So, and a couple of times, actually both versions. Actually, a couple of times, the detail of the acting elevated a moment that had kind of gone by me when at 9 years old I'd read about it in the James Blish books. But also a couple of times, something that James Blish was able to describe wasn't quite as impressive when staged for 1960s television. Yeah. So that cuts both ways. But I think probably my most recent memory of Kirk was those less than satisfactory J.J. Abrams films. And there's this sort of parody version of Kirk in there, where he's this undisciplined hotshot. And that was the sort of parody version, which we all knew. We come in peace, shoot to kill. And that is not the Kirk of those early episodes at all.
No, that's the thing that people get confused about Kirk and Picard, right? Picard was the rebel who aged into being reserved and disciplined, where Kirk was the disciplined bookworm that aged into being a little more action-oriented.
Yes.
They kind of reversed.
Yeah.
I mean, the original series... I don't want to spoil too much what we're going to say at the end of Next Gen as we rank them, but I think myself and one of my co-hosts who's a little bit older than me and remembers the original series from its first run, we both like the original series better than Next Gen. And it's because it definitely has lower lows than Next Gen. Like, there's some god-awful, abysmal episodes of original series, but it has higher highs. They took greater risks, I think, whereas Next Gen was more consistent, but Next Gen never hit the highs the original series hit at its best.
There's a few episodes, I think. Everyone talks about the Inner Light, but I'm doing a little podcast series at the moment. I'm hijacking a dormant podcast feed and using it to shamelessly self-promote. And so I'm picking people, some of whom know Star Trek, some of whom don't, where I think their views might be interesting, and picking an episode for them to watch or for us to watch together. And I think, this is the episode that's out now. So it'll be the second episode in the series. I asked children's author Andy Stanton, who'd never watched an episode of Star Trek before in his life, to watch an episode of Next Generation with me, and I picked for him Tapestry, because I thought that would appeal to his sense of storytelling and allegory and so on. And he was really moved by it, really kind of taken with it. And there's a kind of emotional sophistication that I don't think you often see in the original series. I think when the original series is at its best, and they're inventing all this stuff out of completely whole cloth, which is what's so impressive about it, there is some really good relationship stuff. Like, I also picked to show someone else Devil in the Dark. And my favorite moment of Devil in the Dark is not the revelation that the Horter is a mother protecting his eggs, as brilliant as that is. It is fantastic. It's what happens to Spock, who begins by subtly undermining Captain Kirk's orders and saying, maybe see if you can capture the creature, as apparently it's the last of its kind. And Kirk's forced to say, no, it is a killer, and it's shoot on sight. And then moments later, like 10 minutes later, when there's that cave-in and Spock knows that Kirk is in front of the creature, he's the one saying, Jim, kill it. Because in that second, his love for his friend overwhelms his scientific curiosity.
Yeah. And
that's brilliant. That's fantastic. But I think there are a few episodes of TNG I think just have a little bit more sophistication. I'd also probably include Chain of Command in that list, which is just unbelievably good. And possibly, this is a bit more of a reach because it's much more kind of esoteric, but possibly the two Moriarty episodes.
Those are good episodes. Our opinion on Next Gen has definitely differed with yours in that when we ranked the seasons, we haven't ranked the 7th season yet, even though we finished watching it. We haven't recorded that episode. We're wrapping it up. But we have season 5 at the top. And then it honestly goes 4, 3, 2, 6, 1.
Oh.
Because season 6 has Chain of Command parts 1 and 2 and Tapestry and Relics and Ship in a Bottle, which are great episodes. But it also has Time's Arrow part 2, Aquiel, Schism, Suspicion that are so bad. Whereas we felt like season 5 was just more consistent. Like it had hit its stride, and there really aren't many bad episodes in season 5, where we still found quite a few bad episodes in season 6.
Season 6 is up and down. There's no question. But I'm looking at my spreadsheet now.
Yeah.
And this is not how did I feel. This is, I have given each episode a star rating, and this is the average.
Sure.
And the average for season 6 was 3.9, and that is the highest I gave anything
out of 5.
Out of 5, yeah.
What's season 5's average?
Season 5 is not far behind. Season 5 is 3.5.
Okay,
so it's still pretty good.
Yeah. We do have to do consensus ranking because there's multiple hosts, and we have to agree. And sometimes that means things get ranked above or below, or I would prefer them. But yeah, I did like Next Gen. Like I said, I think I thought the original series was a little better overall, just because the higher highs. I mean, when you talk about the highs of
season
the
season 1 of the original series is just looking at my spreadsheet now. It's 3.76, so that beats every season of TNG except for 6, which is
so
3.9.
You've got when we ranked our best episodes of the original series, City on the Edge of Forever was number 1.
That's
it holds up so well. followed closely behind by the cage. Like, that is an awesome episode, despite its like non-airing status or whatever.
I'll tell you what I didn't like about the cage.
What didn't you like about the cage?
It has this reputation where everyone always says about it, oh, it's too cerebral, it's too good for television, too intellectual, too cerebral. And I don't think that's the problem. I think the problem is there's no feeling of camaraderie between the crew. It feels cold, not because it's dealing with esoteric concepts, but because I don't get the feeling that these characters really like each other. There's a bit where after Pike has been captured, number one and some of the others are sitting around kind of debating what to do. And they don't sound like they're desperate to get their friend back. They sound like they're solving a space Sudoku. And what I really noticed is as soon as I watched The Cage on what it was, like 29th of December as a kind of warm-up. It wasn't part of my original plan, but I thought, I've got it, I'll watch it.
You got to do it.
And I was pleased I did, because then what I saw was like 10 minutes into the man trap, I was like, oh, okay, here's the difference. First difference is that Kirk likes being captain of the Enterprise. And that's huge. Like, Pike looks like he would rather be anywhere else. But even more importantly, William Shatner looks like he loves being Captain Kirk. And that's so important. And I think that's the kind of the secret sauce. I don't think we would be here talking about Star Trek if Jeffrey Hunter had done season 1.
You may very well be right. I mean, I'm going to be an apologist with the context of Strange New Worlds and the novels and things, where we've set Pike in the Cage's story. He was going through a crisis of not sure he was in the right position in the right place, and he's even talking to his doctor about that in the episode. Whereas I think the Pike we get in Strange New Worlds, he loves the crew and he wants to be there. Yeah. But I can see where that comes across for sure without the additional retconning of today.
Yeah.
To justify it.
And listen, like I said before, I have no interest in debating someone else into agreeing with me. It's absolutely fine for people to take different things. And actually, the book also includes about a dozen little essays, like 100 or 200 words from more or less noteworthy friends and friends of friends giving their opinions. And sometimes they agree and sometimes they disagree. So off the top of my head, Gemma Arrowsmith and I both agree that The Inner Light is definitely an amazing hour of television, whereas Dan Starkey, better known as the Sontaran Strax from Doctor Who, is an enormous fan of Cat's Paw, which I thought was one of the most absurd and ridiculous wastes of my time I'd ever seen. But he remembered watching it when he was 8, and he thought it was fantastic.
We ranked Cat's Paw dead last for season 2.
Dead last. Exactly. So I'm all about diversity of opinion and not about groupthink.
Well, I already pre-ordered your book, so I'm excited to read it. Although in the American Amazon, it says it's not coming out till June.
You sure that's not the Kindle version?
June 13th.
You sure that's not the Kindle version?
No, this is the hard. I'm on the hardcover page.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, you can import it if you're desperate.
I love Kindle, but I prefer to hold something in my hands and stick it on my bookshelf. So I know you can't see, but I have books all the way around this room. I'm surrounded, and when I first got this house that actually had room to do a library, I went on every used book site and bought up every Trek novel. So I actually own every Star Trek novel. I haven't read them all yet, but I read a lot growing up, and now I'm working my way through them as
there must be hundreds.
It's like 4 full bookcases.
Wow.
But it is like I bought a ton of them for $1 or $2 used, But yeah, I can't wait to read them all. But yeah, I'm gonna read yours as well. I do have to ask you, the animated series, absolutely awful, right? Worst of all the shows.
It's got its moments.
Sure. I mean, Yesteryear, sure, but
yeah, it's fine. Actually, I didn't like Yesteryear quite as much as the Slaver Weapon. I get one of the things that's interesting is I would do a little bit of looking at other people's websites after I'd seen the episodes, because I'm always interested to know if I have a strongly counter consensus opinion. Just so I can be aware of that. So I didn't know I was supposed to love Yesteryear, and I did like it, but I thought it would have been better if Spock had Kirk to bounce off. But the Slave Weapon's very impressive, and there's a few other ones that kind of are fine. But it's a children's Saturday morning cartoon with all that implies. It's interesting that Roddenberry in his lifetime would kind of flip back and forth between declaring it canon and then deciding that it had nothing to do with any other televised Star Trek. It was always
glad
the
that
red-headed stepchild.
Now.
Yeah.
I'm glad we consider it canon now. I mean, Roddenberry...
Well, Lower Decks considers it so canon, they basically reference it every other episode.
So I know, I love that. Yeah. I'm so glad I have that context, because I'd only watched like one episode of the animated series before we did our podcast, and I hated it, but it's short enough that you just breeze through it and you're done. And it should count. It's like the same actors, the same writers. Like, it counts. It just didn't translate well to that medium. Whereas Lower Decks figured out how to do animated Star Trek. They really nailed it, in my opinion.
You must know the story about Leonard Nimoy's participation in the animated series.
He was not into it, but he agreed to do it if they'd hire the rest of the cast.
Yeah, well, the original plan was they wanted to hire William Shatner, Leonard Nimoy, DeForest Kelley, and then they thought, well, James Doohan and Maytel Barrett could do all the other voices.
Right.
And Leonard Nimoy pointed out that what they essentially done was hired all the white actors.
Right.
And he said he wasn't going to take part unless they hired Nichelle Nichols and George Takei as well, which left poor Walter Koenig last in, first out, left him out in the cold. But he got to write an episode, which also isn't bad, I don't think. I think the Infinite Vulcan isn't bad.
No, it's not. It's one of the better episodes, but I did feel really bad for him that Chekhov was not included. Although I like Maress and Eriks, and I wish we got to know them a little bit better.
Yes.
I do. I do have a soft spot for the characters and aspects of the animated series, even though I hate the series overall.
First appearance of the holodeck.
True. Yeah. True. There's some good elements to it. It just it just never really gelled. I think a lot of times that condensing it to the 25 minutes or whatever, they were still trying to write it in such a way that it felt rushed to try to condense the story into a shorter format.
There is at least one episode where the running time appears to be padded out by William Shatner having out James Tiberius Kirk about 5 times, with longer pauses between each word every single time he does it.
It's an interesting artifact. I'm glad it exists, but yeah.
But he was kind of on his uppers, wasn't he? He wasn't getting very much work, so I think he was glad to do it, but he was having to go into recording booths and record his lines while in like touring Shakespeare productions. And he does sound like he isn't really giving a great deal of thought to how these line readings are coming across.
That doesn't surprise me at all. Because Shatner he's interesting. I do have to ask, now that you've watched all these seasons, what are 1 or 2 or 3, what are your favorite episodes overall across all the series?
In the Pale Moonlight comes to mind immediately.
That's my number 1. That's my number 1.
It's a lot of people's number 1. And I think I had very vague memories of having seen it before. But I knew by reputation. I was like, okay, come on then, in the Pale Moonlight, how good are you? And the answer is, you're amazing. It's really, really special. The first, the names I find very confusing. What's the first Deep Space Nine Mirror Universe episode? Is it Crossover?
Yes.
That's really
good. We just watched that. Yeah.
Yeah. That's that. I was really. I was like, why have we not done the Mirror Universe since Mirror Mirror? What the hell is going on? And unfortunately, then they keep revisiting the well, and it dries up fairly fast. But
until Discovery finds new.
Yeah. Actually, Enterprise. The Enterprise Mirror Universe.
I haven't seen those.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, no,
you can tease our audience.
I'll leave it as a tease for your benefit. But the Enterprise visits the Mirror Universe in quite a striking way in its final season. I'll leave it at that.
If it's the final season, I had to have seen it. I just don't remember it at this point.
I think you would remember this.
Okay. I did not watch it since it aired. When I heard it was going to be the final season, and that they fired their entire writing staff and hired Judith and Garfield Reeves-Stevens, who wrote all the novels with Shatner, which I love. Yes. I love their novels. I recorded them all on VHS and then binged it right before that really good finale, and then the next gen episode that they aired.
Yes.
So I did see the final season, but yeah, it was 20 years ago now, so my memory is a little murky. And I was probably drinking heavily because I was still in college at that point. So
Some episodes of Enterprise are probably best viewed through an alcoholic stupor.
I mean, I remember Brent Spiner in that final season. I remember, I remember they talked to Shatner and they thought they were getting Shatner, and that never panned out.
No, but
yeah, it was a good final season overall, other than the fact that their finale was a next gen episode. But it wasn't a bad episode. It's just not what they deserved.
No,
and so
I think I described it in a forthcoming book as Rose and Troy and Gildenreicher are dead.
That makes a lot of sense. So we talked about best. What are the worst episodes of all these?
Might bring the spreadsheet up again here. Look out for
I'm looking at my spreadsheets as we're talking.
So the book there's an index at the back of the book which will be all the episodes in ranked order. So if you want to answer this question for yourself when you get the book, dear listener, then you can. So let me just kind of pick a few at random. So actually, this might be controversial, but as I know it's some people's favorites, but I gave 1 star to Let That Be Your Last Battlefield on 2 counts. First, it's gibberish.
Yeah.
I mean, it's complete nonsense from beginning to end. And secondly, its message appears to be that black and white people are equally to blame for racism. And I'm not 100% sure that is A, true, or B, a message I want my progressive 1960s television series to be telling me. So 1 star for Let That Be Your Last Battlefield. I think I did give half a star to Spock's Brain. I think that might be the very worst. We
actually did not rank that as the worst of season 3. We ranked it second to worst.
Oh, there you go.
But we ranked Lights of Zatar below Spock's Brain.
That's pretty bad. Obviously, Code of Honor is dreadful. I hated We'll Always Have Paris. That's dreadful. Obviously, Move Along Home from Deep Space Nine. So as I was doing this, I was doing one-line reviews on Twitter every day, and I think my one-line review for Move Along Home is just, "Oh dear, oh no." We're somewhat spoiled for choice later on. Just sort of looking around here. I mean, there's some pretty ropey stuff in early Voyager, and late Voyager, but Life Signs is pretty dreadful. Alter Ego, I don't even remember anything about it, but apparently I gave it 1 star.
My least favorite episode of the original series that I hated with a passion was Tomorrow is Yesterday, season 1.
I gave that 4. I don't even remember it though.
Really?
What
I hated about it is it made absolutely no sense. It was a time travel episode that did not have any logic to the story. It was Captain Christopher that they pulled out of the airplane.
Oh, that one. Yeah.
Yeah. I convinced my co-host to rank that below Lights of Zatar when we ranked the whole series. I was so angry about that episode. And I also, and this I did not get on our ranking as low because I fought him, but Charlie X I absolutely hated.
So I think this is interesting because I think sometimes you can be charmed by an episode and be convinced because you're charmed by it to overlook all the things that don't make any sense. And I think sometimes something will just kind of get under your skin. You'll go, but no. And then all the other pluses of that episode will fade away. Darmok's a good example of this, right? Darmok is many people's favorite episodes. Darmok doesn't make a particle of sense, right? The whole premise of the episode is completely bogus. It is impossible for any race to have a language only in metaphors, because how does anyone learn the metaphors?
Right.
Let alone how do they use this language to make laws or build spaceships? It's completely bogus. And listen, there are a lot of things in Star Trek which are completely bogus. Here's a short list of other things in Star Trek that don't make sense. Warp drive. Transporters.
Yeah.
Universal translators. Subspace radio. Etc., etc., etc. All right?
Sure.
Half human, half Vulcans. What? So all these things make no sense at all. But most of the time, they're just used to make a story happen.
Mm-hmm.
They're not what the story is about. I don't like it when Star Trek is too pedantic. I'm a little bit anxious about what's happening in Discovery at the moment because they're going back to the chase, which is a prime example on this. I don't care why all aliens look like actors. I have a strong suspicion it may be because they're all actors, and I don't mind. Don't pull on that thread, because what you might end up doing is unraveling the whole tapestry. Similarly, with one of the things that my least favorite bits of the otherwise strong Enterprise season 4 is all that nonsense about why Klingons have ridged foreheads and they didn't in the original series. I don't care. Makeup improved. Stop. I don't go there. But Darmok is only about how the children of Tamar, is that what they're called? How Paul Winfield's people, how they communicate and how their language works. It's laser focused on that all the way through, so you can't ignore that. But it's very charming.
It is.
And
we ranked in the middle.
Patrick Stewart are both great. So that's, I think, a really good example of this. So I don't remember it sufficiently well because I was watching it in 2022. But is it all yesterday? Tomorrow's yesterday? Tomorrow's yesterday.
Tomorrow's yesterday, yeah.
I'm sure I wasn't blind to those faults, but it must just have charmed me because I gave it 4 stars.
That's fair. We've certainly come across many episodes that I would say we've made the same argument on. So I'm not going to begrudge you those. Any trends that you want to talk about that you've noticed over the run?
It gets harder and harder to reinvent the wheel. I think that's really what I noticed. So when Roddenberry relaunches Star Trek with the Next Generation, everyone thinks he's crazy because how do you do Star Trek without Kirk and Spock? But he just goes, we're 80 years in the future. It's a different ship. It's a different crew, but the premise will still work. We're like the old sailing ships, sailing off to new lands, discovering new people, and resolving their conflicts for them before we head off somewhere else. So fine. All you have to do is find a new set of characters. And that takes a little bit of time, but they get pretty lucky with that initial crop of actors. And even the ones who take their time settling in find a groove and eventually all become pretty much beloved, even though about half of them end up getting about 10 lines between them in the subsequent movies. So they want to do something different for Deep Space Nine. Okay, well, if Star Trek was Wagon Train to the Stars, Deep Space Nine can be Frontier Town. And what that means, and the reason why it ends up being so serialized, is because we're not flying off somewhere new at the end of each episode. And so all the bad decisions we made at the end of the last episode are still here at the beginning of the next episode. Okay, all right. So we kind of got away with it a third time. Mm-hmm. Now we've got to do it again. And the big problem with Voyager is that the premise doesn't really generate stories in any helpful way. I think I analyzed Voyager as there are 3 basic Voyager stories. One is it's just Star Trek. We've just turned up at a new planet and we'll see what's going on there. Fine. Nothing you could have done on any of the earlier series, but fine if the story's good enough. And then 2 which are more specific. One is, oh no, we've run out of unobtainium.
Sure.
And the problem with that one is if you keep doing it, then either you have to face the reality that the ship's going to get less and less well-repaired, well-maintained, which they never want to do on Voyager. It always has to be the best ship in the sector. Or you have to say, well, we've actually replaced everything now. In which case you can't do that story anymore. And then the third story, of course, is Captain, wait, I think I found a way home. Oh, hang on, never mind.
Honestly,
again, you always know the ending before the episode starts.
The thing with Voyager was I really felt the premise of setting up the Maquis versus the Starfleet was a really interesting premise that they didn't develop at all.
No, they do it in 4 episodes.
Right.
And that comes back. That's the other thing. This is the thing about Roddenberry's there's no conflict on the bridge rule. And, of course, we've no way of knowing how rigidly Roddenberry himself would have stuck to that. But Rick Berman evidently thought that was sacrosanct. That he said, like, if this had been my show I'd have created, I wouldn't have made that rule. But it wasn't my show. I'm the custodian of Gene Roddenberry's show, and that was his rule. And I'm going to make sure everyone sticks to it, even though it drove the writers crazy. So Deep Space Nine gets a pass because only about half the characters are Starfleet anyway. But it's fine to have visiting Klingons squabbling with Ferengi barkeepers. That's absolutely fine. But you can't have Dax and Cisco actually having a real face-off.
Mhm.
So the big problem, I think, with Enterprise, the fundamental problem with Enterprise is not that it's set in the past, not that it's an earlier crew, not that it's not the best crop of actors we've ever cast, although that is probably true. It's that these characters are all doofuses.
Oh, I thought you were going to say it was the theme song, but okay.
Oh no, the theme song is dreadful, but that only lasts 90 seconds per episode. So you can
Right.
mute that. That's fine. But you can't get away from the fact that the characters are doofuses.
Yeah.
And so for 10 or so years, we've been watching characters who we can aspire to be, who manage to solve complicated science fiction problems while being terribly nice to each other all of the time, which is very aspirational. And now we're just watching a bunch of screw-ups. Is there any episode in which Trip does not make a decision which makes everything worse?
Oh.
So that's really disappointing. And I think that's really where you begin to see that just the whole thing has got a bit tired.
Yeah.
What is amazing, though, because I did watch all these episodes on the official DVDs and Blu-rays, partly just because I don't trust streaming services. I wouldn't want this to be suddenly interrupted, and partly just because it's nice to have a collection of things. I don't know if you can empathize with that at all, James, looking behind you. Possibly you can.
Not at all.
But that means I also had access to all of the behind-the-scenes stuff they choose to put on there. And when things are just out, everybody's like, this was super, and everyone was adorable, and I had the best time of my life, and I would rather cut my arm off than lose the chance to work with these people again. And then when things are a bit older, people are sometimes like, this didn't work out quite as well as we hoped, although overall I have very fond memories. Listen to Brown and Braga on the Enterprise DVDs. He will not let anyone else speak before he is stumbling out yet another apology.
Oh,
The
man.
tone is extraordinary. I've never seen anything like it before. He's so crestfallen. And I think maybe if Enterprise had run the full 7 years, not that there's anything magical about 7, it's just that the previous 3 had all run 7. Then even if it had been exactly those same sets of episodes in those first 4 years and had been received in exactly the same way, I think he would have felt less like he had to apologize. But it's weird. It's really weird.
I also think, going back to the Ron D. Moore, Brown and Braga thing, Brown and Braga, his career post Star Trek, Threshold, Terra Nova, I mean, it's not, he did work on the Orville, but it's not a stellar career, whereas Ron D. Moore has gone on to reboot Battlestar Galactica brilliantly. Outlander is a wonderful show. For All Mankind on Apple TV, I'm in season 3 right now. It's fantastic. You can see which part of the partnership pulled their weight and which didn't, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that Moore went to DS9 and Braga went to Voyager because of my love of DS9, baby. But yeah, it's not that Brandon Braga is terrible. It's just to me, and this is an outsider's perspective. I obviously wasn't there. I don't know them personally, but I feel like they both got the shows they deserved. And the fact that Brandon Braga is the one that stuck around makes sense to me based on how it slowly went down.
Yeah, I think that's right. So yeah, Enterprise is a bit of an ignominious end, which is disappointing, but it's hard for shows to go out on top. Yeah, because going out on top means that you're still a success, you're still making money for the studio and the network, and therefore all they want is for you to pump out more episodes. And so it's true of almost every show that you start weak because you don't know what you're doing, you figure it out, you keep going until you're amazing, and then you keep going just that little bit further, and then finally you're cancelled.
And Next Gen, I don't think ended strong, but that was a show, probably the only Star Trek show that still went out on top.
Oh, ratings-wise, for sure. Deep Space Nine came in with amazing ratings for its pilot and then quickly dropped down to about half of what Next Gen was getting, even in its last season. And it got very high ratings for its final episode.
I'm amazed DS9 got 7 seasons, but I'm super grateful they did.
Yeah, well, I say, it's because it was in syndication and no one was watching. And Paramount was only interested in UPN and can we make UPN work? And we'll be the ones that have the 5th network.
And Voyager did really well in the ratings for a long time.
Yeah, it wasn't bad, but again, partly because Paramount was making such a song and dance about UPN. And it was I wasn't in America at the time. I think it was on 3 days a week or something. It wasn't putting out a lot of programming.
Yeah, UPN was 2 hours a night, 5 days a week.
Okay.
But it was, but I do remember having a TV Guide magazine that was announcing Voyager was the #1 episode on satellite television. At that time, nobody had satellite. We all still had cable.
Yes.
But for the people that were early satellite adopters, they loved Voyager. So.
That reminds me of They Might Be Giants, who were something like the best-selling unsigned band or something like that. And they said that's like being called the world's tallest midget.
Anything else you want to cover that I didn't ask you, or plug, or whatever you want to do to wrap this up? Because I want to make sure we've served the purpose and sold your books and got people interested.
Buy my book if you're interested in these things. If you want to hear some of these opinions expressed in a slightly more cogent form, because I had time to go back and tidy up the prose, then by all means, please go and buy Star Trek: Discovering the TV Series, which should be available wherever books are sold sometime this spring or summer. We're not quite sure, but definitely in the UK from Amazon from mid-April. And if you want to hear me interviewing other people, then, like I said, I used to do a podcast called Best Pick, which began as a journey through every film that had won Best Picture at the Academy Awards, which we did in a random order just to keep things interesting. And then diversified into looking at other films, and then we gave it a bit of a rest. But we resurrected it over Christmas to look at Doctor Who, and I've resurrected it now to look at a few random Star Trek episodes. So you can also find that at bestpickpod.com.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time tonight and for staying up late, because I know you're in the UK, so that's right. This is very late for you.
It's not too bad. I'm actually going to record another podcast in about an hour's time, which is going to be even later. Yes.
I go to bed I've got 2 very young children, so I go to bed by 10 p.m. my time. So if I were you, I'd be already asleep.
Yeah, I think I might be recording that next one in my pajamas.
Nice.
And no doubt surrounded by no children, but 3 obstreperous cats. Who will let it be known that if I'm up, they can. Then why aren't I feeding them?
Well, my cat's in the other room. But thank you very much, Tom. I very much appreciate it. I look forward to reading your book, and I hope you all enjoyed this episode.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's All Been Done presents
Who's Got the Time?